The security guard looked at the woman in the dusty Ford pickup and decided, before she'd said a single word, that she did not belong on his base. He decided it the way men like him always decide it, fast and certain and with a little curl at the corner of the mouth. What he could not have known, what nobody at the gate of Fort Renner knew, that blistering August morning, was that the woman behind the cracked windshield was Brigadier General-select Yvette Sinclair, and that in 72 hours she would stand on a parade field in front of 2,000 soldiers and take command of every acre of dirt, every motor pool, and every single contractor working that gate. For 51 minutes, he kept her standing in the Georgia sun like a beggar. He had no idea that the entire little kingdom he'd built at that checkpoint, the swagger, the clipboard, the power to make people small, had about 90 seconds left to live. And the thing that ended it didn't come from a courtroom or a general's star. It came from a security camera he'd forgotten was even running. Sinclair had asked for the old truck on purpose. Her aide had offered the government sedan, the one with the placard and the driver, and she'd waved it off. She wanted to come in quiet. 3 weeks earlier, while she was still finishing out her last assignment at the Pentagon, a stack of complaints had crossed her desk. Inspector General hotline transcripts, mostly. The kind that get logged and forwarded and buried. Soldiers from Fort Renner, young ones, mostly enlisted, mostly black, describing the same gate, the same crew of contract guards, the same humiliations, bags dumped on the asphalt, IDs called fake to their faces, a specialist made to stand spread eagle on the hood of her own car in front of her kids because a guard didn't like her attitude. The garrison had responded to every single complaint with the same 3 sentences about following procedure. She'd read those transcripts twice. Then she'd decided that before she pinned on a star and shook 100 hands and let everybody put on their best face for the new boss, she was going to see the gate the way a private sees it. So she'd put on jeans and a faded t-shirt from a charity 5K, borrowed a truck with a dent in the tailgate, tucked her real credentials deep in the console, and carried instead a temporary contractor day pass under a cover name. She wanted to be nobody. She got her wish. The man running the lane that morning was Roy Tedeschi, shift supervisor for Bastion Integrated Security, the firm that had held the access control contract at Renner for the better part of 9 years. Tedeschi was 54, built like a man who'd once been an athlete and had spent 2 decades since letting that fact go soft around the belt. He wore his polo a size too tight on purpose, badge clipped at the hip, mirrored sunglasses. The whole costume of a man who had never been a soldier but had spent so long standing next to soldiers that he'd convinced himself he outranked them all. The guards under him called him Chief, which he loved, and which was not his title. Hold up. He didn't lean down to her window. He stood back from it. The way you stand back from something you've already decided is dirty. Where you headed? Logistics Readiness Center, Sinclair said. Easy, pleasant. I've got a vendor walkthrough this morning. That right. He looked at the truck. He looked at her. He looked at the truck again, and she watched him build the whole story in his head in about 2 seconds. The dent, the t-shirt, the woman, the skin, and slot her into it. Pass. She handed him the day pass. He turned it over twice, held it up like he was checking a counterfeit 20, and let a long silence run. A younger guard drifted over from the booth, a kid maybe 23, with a soft, anxious face and a name tape that read Vance. He glanced at the pass, then at his supervisor, the way you check the weather. This is expired, Tedeschi announced. It was not expired. Sinclair knew exactly what it said, because she'd watched the visitor center print it 90 minutes ago. I think if you check the date, you telling me how to read? He said it loud, pitched it up so it carried back to the line of cars stacking behind her. A horn tapped, somewhere back there, and Tedeschi's head snapped toward the sound like a dog. They can wait. Pull it over there. He pointed to the secondary inspection bay, the concrete pad behind the booth where they take the trucks they want to take apart. We're going to take a closer look at you. Here is the thing the cars in that line couldn't see, and the thing that mattered most. Yvette Sinclair had stood in front of incoming small arms fire in Sangin. She had pulled 2 of her own soldiers out of a vehicle that was burning around them, and she still couldn't smell diesel without going somewhere else for a second. She had buried a 19-year-old from her platoon, and then written the letter to his mother, and then flown home and done it 3 more times across 3 deployments. She was not afraid of Roy Tedeschi. She could have ended the conversation with 8 words and a phone call. But that was the whole problem. 8 words would have ended it for her. This morning. This one time. And then she would have driven onto the base she was about to command, knowing nothing she didn't already know. She wanted to feel the full weight of it, the slow grind of being small at that gate, the exact texture of the thing those soldiers had tried to describe on a hotline that nobody listened to. So she put the truck in drive, eased it onto the inspection pad, killed the engine, and let Roy Tedeschi do to her, in broad daylight, every single thing she had read about in those transcripts. She was, in her own way, going undercover on her own base. She just didn't know yet how deep that hole went. He made her get out. He made her stand with her hands visible, while Vance and a third guard opened her doors, lifted her floor mats, ran their hands under the seats, popped the toolbox in the bed, and let the wrenches clatter onto the concrete, and left them there. The sun came straight down. Sweat ran into the small of her back. 20 minutes in, an older sergeant first class, waiting 3 cars back, leaned out his window and called, "Hey Chief, she good?" I got a brief, and Tedeschi told him to mind his lane. And the sergeant, who had bills and a record and a family, and everything to lose in a confrontation with the man who controlled whether he got to work, pulled his head back inside. "You got an attitude," Tedeschi told her, which was a remarkable thing to say to a woman who had not raised her voice once. "I deal with people like you all day. Think you can flash a piece of paper and roll on through? This is a military installation, sweetheart. This is serious." "Yes," Sinclair said quietly. "It is." While he had her standing there, a white box truck rolled up to the commercial lane 40 feet to her left. No markings, local plates. And here is where the morning stopped being a story about a rude man and became something else entirely. Though Sinclair was the only person at that gate with the eyes to see it, Tedeschi turned his head, caught sight of the box truck, and lifted 2 fingers off his clipboard. A small casual flick, the wave of a man clearing a friend. The truck didn't stop for inspection, didn't slow. The guard on the commercial lane never came out of the booth. The truck rolled onto Fort Renner without so much as a manifest check, and Tedeschi turned right back to Sinclair and said, "What's a vendor walkthrough, anyway? You even know what a vendor is?" She filed it. The way you file the shape of a thing you're going to need later. A woman with an expired pass that wasn't expired gets her toolbox dumped on the ground. An unmarked truck gets a finger wave and a clear road. She'd been a logistics officer for 26 years. She knew exactly what an unsearched truck driving onto a federal installation looked like, and it did not look like a vendor walkthrough. It looked like theft. The second soldier they broke that morning was a kid named Andre Holloway. Specialist. Couldn't have been more than 22, in his ACUs, on foot because his car was in the shop, trying to get to the dining facility before his shift. Tedeschi had finished with Sinclair's truck and hadn't yet let her go. He was making her wait now, just to make her wait. The cruelty gone purely recreational. When Holloway came up the pedestrian lane and made the mistake of having a CAT card that the scanner stuttered on. "Step out of the line. Sir, it's just the reader. It does that if you... Did I ask you to talk?" Sinclair watched it happen the way you watch a thing you already know the ending of. Holloway's face did something she recognized from 100 young soldiers. The careful smoothing over, the dropping of the eyes, the swallowing of the obvious thing. He'd been here before. He knew the script. He put his hands where they could be seen, and he said "no, sir," to questions that didn't deserve a no, sir. And Tedeschi let him stand there sweating for the pure pleasure of it, and at one point said, loud, to Vance, "These kids, man, you give 'em a uniform." And Vance, the young guard, didn't laugh. Vance looked at his boots. Sinclair noticed that too. By the time Tedeschi swaggered back over and tossed her day pass onto the hood of her truck, tossed it, made her pick it up off the hot metal, 51 minutes had gone by. He told her she could go. He told her, "And fix your attitude before you come back to my gate." He turned his back on her. Already done, already on to the next person to make small. Sinclair picked up the pass. She got in the truck. She did not drive onto the base. She pulled the truck into the visitor center lot, parked it, and made one phone call. Then she sat very still for a moment, with her hands on the wheel, and the thing on her face was not anger, exactly. It was the particular stillness of a person who has just decided that a problem they came to study is much larger than they were told, and that they are now going to take it apart down to the studs. The call she made was to her senior enlisted advisor, Command Sergeant Major Eli Rourke, who had served with her on and off for 15 years and who was, at that moment, in a hotel 40 minutes away, ironing the uniform he'd wear to her change of command. She told him 3 things. She told him what she'd seen at the gate. She told him about the box truck, and she told him to find the post-provost marshal, quietly, and to have CID, the Army's criminal investigators, pull every gate camera, every commercial lane log, and every Bastion integrated security access record going back 90 days, before anybody at that gate knew anyone was looking. "Ma'am," Rourke said, and she could hear him already moving, already pulling his boots on. "How quiet we keeping this?" "Quiet until it isn't," she said, and then very, very loud. The provost marshal at Fort Renner was a major named Del Fontenot, and he was, as it turned out, exactly the right kind of tired. He'd been at Renner 2 years. He'd written up the gate complaints himself 3 times, and watched the garrison wave them off 3 times, and he had a folder in his desk he hadn't been able to do anything with, because the contract sat above his head, tangled up in money, and signatures, and a civilian deputy garrison official who always seemed to make the paperwork disappear. When a command sergeant major he'd never met walked into his office that afternoon and said the incoming commanding general had personally watched Bastion wave an uninspected truck onto the installation. That morning, Fontenot sat back in his chair and said, very softly, "Oh, thank God." It took CID's forensic accountants and the camera footage about 30 hours to find the flaw of it, and the flaw was lower than anyone had guessed. Bastion integrated security wasn't just rude. Bastion was the cover. For at least 2 years, a handful of Bastion supervisors, Tedeschi chief among them, had been running uninspected vehicles through the commercial lane on a schedule. Sometimes the trucks brought things on. More often they took things off. Fuel, drawn from the post bulk supply on falsified pump logs, copper and tooling boxed out of the maintenance facilities. Whole pallets of MREs and electronics rerouted from the supply warehouse and driven off the base in plain sight, because the men paid to inspect every vehicle, leaving Fort Renner, were the men doing the stealing. The harassment at the gate wasn't a separate problem from the theft. It was the same problem. Make the gate a place of fear. Make the soldiers keep their heads down and their mouths shut and their eyes on their boots. And nobody looks too hard at the white box truck that gets the friendly little wave. Tedeschi hadn't been building a kingdom of cruelty for fun. He'd been building a wall of silence, one humiliated specialist at a time, to hide a warehouse full of stolen federal property. And the wave-through worked because somebody on the inside was killing every audit before it could land. The forensic team followed the cleared paperwork up the chain, and it stopped at the desk of Vernon Stagg, the deputy garrison official for logistics and contracting, the same man whose signature had quietly closed out every IG complaint about the gate. The same man who'd renewed Bastion's contract twice without competition. The same man who, the accountants discovered, had a beach property in his sister-in-law's name that his GS salary could not begin to explain. Stagg was the reason the trucks rolled and the reason the complaints died. Stagg was the mole inside the house. They moved on a Thursday morning, 2 days before the change of command, in the cool hour, just after the gate's morning rush. Sinclair was there. She wanted to be there. But she didn't go in her star. She wasn't a general yet, wouldn't be until Saturday, and she didn't go in to gloat. She stood off to the side of the inspection pad, in the same jeans and the same charity t-shirt, near enough to see Roy Tedeschi's face when it happened. It happened fast. A Sci-D convoy doesn't announce itself, it arrives. 3 unmarked sedans and a pair of MP vehicles came up the access road and boxed the gate, and agents in plain clothes and MPs with badges out moved on the booth and the inspection bay and the commercial lane all at once. Major Fontenot was in front, and his voice carried clean across the asphalt. "Roy Tedeschi, step away from the booth. Hands where I can see them." Tedeschi's face did the thing Sinclair had been waiting for. The mirrored sunglasses came halfway down his nose. The clipboard sagged in his hand. What is this? "You can't. I run this gate. This is a contractor checkpoint. You can't just. You're being detained pending charges of theft of government property, conspiracy, and falsification of federal records," Fontenot said, and Sinclair noticed he said it without any heat at all, which was somehow worse for Tedeschi than shouting would have been. "Put the clipboard down, and here is the small thing that broke the whole rest of it open, the thing that turned a detention into a conviction." Young Vance, the guard with the soft, anxious face, who had spent 2 years looking at his boots, stepped out of the booth before anyone told him to, and he was already talking. "I'll tell you whatever you want to know," he said, fast, the words falling over each other. A kid who'd been carrying something heavy for a long time and had just been told he could set it down. "I've got the schedule, the truck schedule." He made me wave 'em through. He said it was a separate inspection. I knew it wasn't. "I've got texts." An MP put a steadying hand on his shoulder and walked him to a sedan, not as a suspect, but as the most valuable witness on the installation. And Roy Tedeschi watched the wall of silence he'd built turn around and testify against him. They caught Stagg trying to leave. He'd gotten a call. Somebody always gets a call. And he was in his office with a shredder running and a banker's box half empty when Fontenot's people came through the door. He didn't run. Men like Stagg don't run. They negotiate. He stood up, smoothing his tie, and started to say something about a misunderstanding, about jurisdiction, about how he was sure they could sit down and sort this out reasonably. And an agent reached over and switched off the shredder mid-page, and the room went quiet, and Stagg's mouth kept moving for another second, with no sound coming out of it, like a fish. By Thursday afternoon, the contract was suspended, the commercial lane was frozen, and a warehouse in a town 20 minutes off post, rented, it turned out, under one of Tedeschi's relatives' names, was found stacked to the ceiling with property that belonged to the United States Army. Bastion Integrated Security, 9 years on the Fort Renner contract, was finished by sundown. Now, you'd think that would be the end of it. You'd think the story stops with the bad men in handcuffs. But the part that the soldiers at Fort Renner still tell each other, the part that travelled across the whole installation by Friday night, wasn't the raid. It was Saturday. Saturday was the change of command. Full ceremony, parade field, the colours snapping in the heat, 2,000 soldiers in formation, and the bleachers full of families and brass, and the outgoing commander, Major General Theodore Cabot, handing over the flag. And standing in the formation that morning, in the front rank of his company, in his dress uniform with his shoulders square, was Specialist Andre Holloway. The kid who'd had his CK card stutter at the gate, the kid who'd learned to drop his eye, who had stood sweating on the pedestrian lane, while a man with a clipboard told a younger man, "You give him a uniform," like it was a joke. He did not know who the new commanding general was. None of them did, not really. There'd been a name on a memo. So when the announcer's voice rolled across the field and the new commander walked out to take the flag, and Andre Holloway lifted his eyes, he saw a woman in the dress uniform of a Brigadier General of the United States Army, a single bright star on each shoulder, the ribbons of 3 combat deployments stacked on her chest, and he knew her face. He knew it instantly. It was the woman from the inspection pad, the woman in the charity t-shirt with her toolbox dumped on the concrete, who had stood there in the heat and said nothing, who had watched them break him and had not looked away. She had seen the whole thing. She had been one of them. General Yvette Sinclair took the flag from Major General Cabot. She passed it to Command Sergeant Major Rourke, who passed it back, the old ritual of a unit accepting its leader, and when it was her turn to speak, she did not talk about strategy, or readiness, or the great traditions of Fort Renner. She set her notes down on the podium, and she didn't pick them back up. 3 days ago, she said, and the field went very still. I drove up to the front gate of this installation in a borrowed truck, in a t-shirt, with a visitor pass and a fake name. I wanted to see how we treat the people who can't do anything to us, the ones with no rank to flash, the young ones, the tired ones. She let that sit. I found out exactly, and I want every soldier on this field, and every soldier who couldn't be here today, to hear me say this once. So there's no confusion about the kind of post this is going to be while I'm standing on it. She looked out at them. She found, somewhere in the second company, a young specialist, standing very straight, and though no one else could have known it, she held his eyes for just a second. "The uniform you are wearing is not a costume," she said. "It is a promise. We make it to each other, and we make it to the people who pay for it. And the day we start using a little bit of power to make a soldier feel small, at our own front gate, is the day we've broken the only promise that matters. Nobody at this installation is too junior to be protected, and nobody, no contractor, no civilian, no officer, nobody, is too comfortable to be held accountable." She paused. "I learned that lesson the hard way once myself, a long time ago, from a sergeant who refused to let me get away with anything. I intend to pass it on the same way. That was all." She didn't name Tedeschi. She didn't name Stagg. She didn't have to. By then the whole base knew, and the silencers on that field was the silence of 2,000 people understanding, all at once, that the woman they'd been quietly humiliated in front of had been their general the entire time. Roy Tedeschi heard about the speech from a cell at the county detention center, where he was waiting on a federal indictment. He'd spent 30 years building himself into the kind of man who decided, fast and certain, who belonged and who didn't, who got the finger wave, and who got the toolbox dumped on the ground. And the very last person he'd ever do it to had turned out to be the one person with the standing to take everything he had and the patience to do it, slowly, lawfully, and in front of God and the whole United States Army. Vernon Stagg's beach house went into federal forfeiture. Tedeschi's warehouse of stolen pallets became Exhibit A. Both men were eventually sentenced to federal prison, and the contract that had let them hide behind a gate for 9 years was rebid from scratch. Tyler Vance, the young guard who finally lifted his eyes off his boots, testified at both trials, because he came forward before the hammer fell, and because what he handed the investigators broke the whole conspiracy open. The prosecutors recommended leniency, and he served no time. The last anyone heard, he'd enrolled in community college. People can choose right up until the last second which side of a thing they want to be standing on. He chose late, but he chose. And Specialist Andre Holloway, General Sinclair, pulled his file the Monday after the ceremony, the way good commanders quietly do, and found a young soldier with clean evaluations and a hard road, and not one person above him paying attention. Within the year he made sergeant. He'll tell you himself, if you ask him, that he stood at that gate, convinced the smallness was permanent, convinced that's just how it was for somebody like him, and that the woman standing next to him in the heat, saying nothing, eating the same humiliation he was eating, turned out to be carrying a star in her pocket the whole time and waiting for the exact right moment to set the world back level. Here's what that gate could never see, and what's worth sitting with for a second. Power doesn't always arrive looking like power. Sometimes it shows up in a dented truck with sweat running down its back, choosing to stand in the sun and feel exactly what you're doing to the people you think can't touch you. The cruelest mistake a bully ever makes isn't the cruelty. It's the certainty, the absolute, lazy confidence that the person in front of him is exactly as powerless as he's decided they are. Roy Tedeschi had 51 minutes to treat a stranger like a human being. He chose, over and over, to do the opposite because he was sure it was free. It was the most expensive choice of his life. So before you go, think about your own gates, the checkpoints in your day where you've got a little bit of power and somebody in front of you has none. The drive-through, the front desk, the new guy nobody's bothering to learn the name of. You never really know who you're standing in front of. And honestly, you shouldn't have to know to do the right thing. If this one got to you, do me a favor and hit that like button. It's the only way the algorithm shows these stories to the people who need them. Subscribe and turn on the bell so you don't miss the next one, because there's always a next one. And tell me down in the comments, was justice finally served at that gate, or did Roy Tedeschi get off easy? I read every single one. Stay kind out there, watch your own gates, and I'll see you in the next story.